They thought their web was too complex to notice. But you cracked the code from the inside, not after the explosion, but while the fuse was still burning. Most people only understand they were being manipulated once it's too late, when the damage is deep and the dust has already settled. But you woke up while the pieces were still shifting, while the illusion was still being performed. You didn't need distance to gain clarity. You saw the choreography in real time, while everyone else applauded the show. That's what rattled them. They were counting on your silence, your exhaustion, your loyalty. You were never meant to catch on. You were meant to fold, to take the fall, to wear the shame. But you didn't. You saw the lines they tried to blur. You felt the strings they tried to pull. And even in the middle of the noise, your clarity scared them more than any confrontation ever could. Because you didn't flinch, you understood. They designed the entire script around your confusion. But once you went quiet, really quiet, the energy flipped. Suddenly their tactics felt like cheap tricks. Their silences weren't mysterious anymore. Their tones weren't unreadable, they were calculated. And once you stopped responding the way they rehearsed, the whole performance began to crumble. You didn't argue. You didn't retaliate. You just stopped giving them an audience. And that silence, it became their loudest exposure. The moment you saw them, not the version they sold you, but the real one, they lost control of the narrative. Now you're not just someone who broke free. You're the one who dismantled the illusion with stillness. They didn't prepare for someone who'd see through them before they got what they came for. They didn't expect their target to become the mirror. And what's worse, they don't know what you'll do next. That's what really haunts them. You are here for a reason. If you feel the call, answer it. Click join to unlock exclusive content, deep insights, and a powerful community. This isn't just a membership, it's an awakening. Step into your divine purpose. Join the chosen. They orchestrated chaos, expecting to control your reaction. But instead of spiraling, you reset your internal compass right in front of them. They pressed every button they thought still worked, tried to provoke an explosion, so they could point at the aftermath and claim, "Look unstable." But you didn't give them the performance they rehearsed for. You didn't break down. You broke through. You didn't lash out. You locked in. Mid-conflict, you updated your inner framework and realigned your emotional boundaries. And that stunned them. The version they were counting on. The one that over-explained, that bent backwards to prove worth, that absorbed blame like a sponge. That version no longer showed up. Instead, there was silence. Not the silence of defeat, but of awareness sharpening. The old patterns dissolved mid-scene. And when you re-entered the room, you weren't looking for justice. You were walking in it. They couldn't grasp that your calm wasn't coldness. It was elevation. You stopped chasing closure. You stopped playing the part they wrote for you. And the silence you offered, it wasn't empty. It was a signal that they no longer held access. Where they once poked and prodded for a rise, you offered stillness. Where they once shaped the narrative, you simply left the table. And now they're squirming, because the game isn't rigged in their favor anymore. The rules changed, and they weren't notified. What unsettles them isn't your distance. It's the realization that their influence no longer lands. They're shadowboxing in a room you've already left, confused by the echo of their own manipulation. They built comfort around a past version of you, one who hesitated, who stayed silent to keep peace, who overextended just to feel seen. That version absorbed their chaos as if it were a responsibility. But when clarity arrived, you stopped negotiating your worth in conversations they controlled. You stopped justifying boundaries they never respected. They weren't in love with your heart. They were addicted to your self-abandonment. And now that you've chosen to return to yourself, they feel robbed. But nothing was stolen. You just stopped sacrificing your center for someone else's convenience. If your heart overflows with God's blessings, let that love shine. Click the super thank you button and give $20 or more to plant seeds of faith that will impact countless lives. Your generosity reflects His abundance. Be a vessel of His grace and watch His kingdom flourish through you. The role they cast you in no longer fits. The lines they wrote fall flat now. You've outgrown the set entirely. What once tethered you, guilt, fear, false loyalty, has burned away. They can't manipulate what's no longer reachable. You're not harder. You're clearer. And they don't know how to engage with clarity. You've stepped out of the illusion they created and into your own truth. That's not a betrayal. That's a rebirth. Their strategy wasn't brute force. It was erosion. Subtle digs. Lingering doubts. They chipped away at your inner compass, hoping you'd hand over your authority without noticing. If they could blur your instincts, if they could make you question your own mind, they didn't need control. You'd give it to them. But that didn't last. Something shifted. You caught the pattern. You felt the offbeat in their rhythm. You reclaimed your inner voice and no longer needed their permission to trust yourself. That quiet defiance, it dismantled their illusion of power, one choice at a time. Validation stopped being a currency you traded in. The need for approval dissolved the moment you realized no one else was qualified to decide your value. The applause, the compliments, the recognition, all irrelevant once you started anchoring into your own knowing. It wasn't arrogance. It was alignment. You stopped being available for confusion. You stopped renting space in your mind to people who benefited from your doubt. And when that shift clicked, their hands lost grip. There was nothing left to tug, twist, or twist again. You were sealed, not because you hardened, but because you finally became whole. If you've been touched by God's goodness, don't keep it to yourself. Click super thank you and sow a gift of $20 or more to help spread His light. Your giving becomes a ripple of grace, blessing hearts and building His kingdom. Let His overflow pour through you. They can't reach you through shame anymore. That sting they relied on, it doesn't hit the same. The blame they used to toss at your feet no longer sticks. The old emotional levers, rusted. They pull, but nothing moves. Your strength isn't just emotional maturity. It's a spiritual upgrade. You don't react because you're not tethered to their version of reality. You're not desperate to explain your worth to someone who tried to profit from your confusion. And that's what disrupts them most. Your stillness exposes their chaos. You see through the patterns now. The choreography of charm, the performance of vulnerability, the bait-and-switch conversations, all visible in 4K. What once looked like connection now reads like a carefully coded script. The warmth wasn't real. The closeness wasn't mutual. The openness, a ploy. You sensed the distortion in the silence between their words. And when it finally clicked, you stopped playing along. Their methods, once subtle, now scream with transparency. It's not mystery, it's manipulation. And the act is over. The charm wore thin. You stopped romanticizing attention that came with strings. The sudden bursts of care, the well-timed compliments, they felt less like love and more like control in disguise. You noticed how their kindness aligned perfectly with what they wanted next. Their deep talks weren't intimacy, they were information gathering. And when you began to pull back, they didn't miss your presence. They missed their ability to pull your strings. The threat isn't that you're angry, it's that you're awake. That makes you dangerous in their world. Because you're not arguing, you're observing. You're not exposing them, you're removing yourself. That's worse, because they can't spin the story anymore. You're not feeding the loop. You're not re-entering the maze. The curtain is open, and the audience is gone. Your silence has weight now. It unsettles them, not because it's cold, but because it's conscious. They feel it, the invisible shift in your energy that says, I see you, and I'm no longer available to be misinterpreted. And that's what terrifies those who thrived off your compliance. You were never hard to understand. They just preferred you confused. You rejected the bait. You didn't step into the trap. They built an entire dynamic around provoking you. And when you didn't dance, the music stopped. What they framed as love was just emotional strategy. And while they were calculating your next move, you quietly exited the game. The show was over, not with a scream, but with a whisper they couldn't hear coming. Their panic isn't random. It's the result of being left in a conversation they can't control anymore. Without your reactions, they are forced to face their own tactics in a mirror they can't shatter. You took the power with you when you left the performance behind. Now the silence plays louder than anything they've ever tried to say. The elevation wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was internal. It was choosing to stay grounded when they try to make you spiral. Now they test, they provoke, they pull, but you don't budge. You don't flinch. You don't explain. That peace you reclaimed isn't passive. It's precise. And the moment you stopped showing up to their chaos, they had to meet the parts of themselves they'd been hiding behind you. They expected your perception to collapse under pressure. But instead, you traced their distortions back to their source. While they rehearsed their denials and rearranged the truth with precision, assuming you'd fold into self-doubt, you stayed conscious. You noticed the patterns hidden beneath their tone changes. You clocked the rhythm of their defensiveness, how their story adjusted depending on who was watching. They weren't simply dishonest, they were deliberate. And you stopped internalizing their lies. You broke it down to its skeleton, decoded the mechanism, and stripped the illusion of power, not by screaming the truth, but by knowing it too deeply to be shaken. You no longer look for proof in their words. You watch the timing. You follow the shift in energy when the pressure rises. You hear the tremble behind the performance. Your intuition became forensic. You saw not just what they did, but why. And now they can't pretend anymore, because the mask doesn't fit the room you're in. You're not just free from the grip. You're fluent in the language they use to control the narrative. You didn't crawl out of confusion. You walked out holding the blueprint. You weren't just affected. You became aware. The delays, the deflections, the emotional detours, all part of a script they thought you'd never read. But you studied the rhythm of their misdirection until it lost its hold on your empathy. You don't even need the apology anymore. The clarity is your closure, and that's what unsettles them. You're not lost, you're literate. You could explain their tactics better than they could execute them. What shakes them now isn't your escape, it's your comprehension. They know you see the invisible threads they once pulled. You saw the switch from charm to pressure, the calculated soft spots, the pretend vulnerability. You don't mistake the performance for sincerity anymore. You don't mistake shared secrets for connection. They were never sharing, they were extracting. But now you hold the lens, and they know it. They underestimated how strategic compassion becomes when it's filtered through wisdom. What they once used to access, you has been turned inward. You reclaimed your softness, but not for their benefit. You aimed it at your own healing. They were never afraid of your anger. They were afraid of your discernment. Because when you stopped offering excuses for their behavior, the story unraveled. Not because you told on them, but because you stopped participating. It wasn't weakness that kept you there. It was your hope. Hope that your sincerity would anchor the chaos. That love would outlast the sabotage. That presence would inspire change. You weren't naive. You were generous. But even generosity has a limit when it's constantly drained. You stopped bending in the name of peace and started standing in the name of truth. And that shift didn't just change your outcome, it changed their access. Now your empathy has a backbone. You still care, but you care with edges. You still feel, but you don't carry what isn't yours. They can't twist your kindness anymore, because it's no longer offered without discernment. You can walk away and still wish them healing, but your energy doesn't follow. And that's what shook the entire structure. The game wasn't over when you stopped loving them. It ended when you stopped abandoning yourself to do it. Empathy isn't your soft spot anymore. It's your boundary line. What they once used to break and now bounces off a shield they can't bypass. The same heart they manipulated for access now has parameters. You still care, but not blindly. You still listen, but you don't absorb what isn't yours. And that change isn't just self-protection, it's spiritual evolution. The switch from rescuing others to preserving yourself was the door they can't unlock. Now that you've turned inward with the care you once gave away freely, their usual tools don't function. You didn't stop being compassionate. You just stopped being available for emotional exploitation. They didn't build the chaos to confuse themselves. They built it to confuse you. The unpredictability, the emotional shifts, the distorted logic. None of it was spontaneous. It was structured disorder designed to keep you chasing something that never existed. But somewhere inside that maze, you became still enough to hear the pattern behind the noise. You began seeing the timing of their affection, the way discomfort always followed clarity, the way their praise came with a price. You weren't just caught in the storm, you studied the clouds. That's why you're not in it anymore. You didn't just escape. You understood. They underestimated your ability to turn pain into precision. While they were busy reworking the script, you were decoding the language. You watched them repackage manipulation as love, chaos as passion, neglect as independence. But your clarity didn't need confirmation. It was built through observation. You pieced together the cycles. You identified the signals. You walked out not just healed, but equipped. That knowledge doesn't just protect you, it empowers you. Now, you're not just immune, you're a translator. And that makes you dangerous to anyone who thrives in confusion. The version of you they controlled was built on uncertainty, not on weakness, but on the absence of internal reference. As long as you needed their feedback to navigate your worth, they could steer you anywhere. But something shifted. The questions stopped. The chasing ended. You began to stabilize without external scaffolding. You didn't need their voice to confirm your value. That silence became the sound of self-possession. And now, the power they thought they had? Gone, not taken, but returned to its rightful source. It wasn't their authority that gave them power. It was your hesitation. They anchored themselves in the space where your clarity hadn't reached yet. But now that you've grown, there's nothing left for them to grip. You don't flinch when they withhold. You don't shrink when they disapprove. Their presence no longer defines your atmosphere. What they're feeling isn't about losing you. It's about losing influence. The frustration isn't heartbreak. It's obsolescence. They're casting lines into water that doesn't carry your reflection anymore. Their tactics were never about truth. They were performance engineered to keep your emotional gaze fixated on them. The inconsistent moods, the vague apologies, the deliberate chaos, none of it was impulsive. It was design, a strategy meant to hijack your focus, even if it meant becoming the villain. They weren't building anything real. They were feeding on emotional relevance. As long as your mind was busy decoding them, they felt seen. And for someone built on fragile identity, that feeling was addictive. Every time they sensed your independence growing, they threw in just enough confusion to reel you back in. Not for love, but to stay at the center of your internal world. You noticed something strange. The tension always returned when peace started to bloom. The pattern wasn't hard to catch once you stopped excusing it. Moments that should have been light were always followed by tension. Words were used not to understand, but to destabilize. And that's when something clicked. You realized your energy was currency, and they were spending it recklessly. So you stopped feeding the story. You didn't withdraw out of bitterness. You unplugged with awareness. Their entire sense of control crumbled because you stopped offering the one thing they couldn't live without, your attention. And now that you're no longer participating, their relevance fades. They weren't addicted to you. They were addicted to being noticed. The dismantling didn't require volume. There was no speech, no dramatic final word. You simply stopped orbiting them. The shift wasn't loud, but it was absolute. They waited for confrontation, for one last explosion to prove they still had pull. But you gave them nothing, not out of spite, but because you'd finally stepped out of the performance. And in doing so, you reclaimed something they never expected you to touch: your silence. It wasn't about vanishing. You stayed present, but your spirit moved on. They could feel it in the way you stopped clinging, stopped explaining, stopped chasing resolution in a maze designed to trap you. You didn't call them out. You simply stopped feeding the narrative. And now they sit in uncertainty, paranoid not because you spoke the truth, but because you saw it. They don't know what you realized, or when, or how. That unknowing has become their new obsession, because you're still standing there, just not playing the role anymore. The scariest part for them isn't the boundary. It's the ease with which you held it. Every step you now take, calm, firm, quiet, is a reminder that you broke the design they thought you'd never see. They don't miss your voice. They miss the power they had when you still needed to use it. They miss the version of you that was tethered to the storyline they controlled. But that version dissolved, and in its place stands someone who no longer needs to speak to be heard. Someone who doesn't react to be valid. Someone whose peace is no longer interrupted by noise, but protected by it. They treated your emotions like a system to manipulate. They studied your rhythm, tracked your habits, and moved accordingly. Their game was rooted in predictability, yours. The more you followed the same emotional loops, the easier you were to pin down. But one day, your internal compass stopped following their magnet. Your timing shifted. Your reactions disappeared. You no longer operated on the settings they programmed. You became unreadable, not because you became chaotic, but because you finally stepped out of their forecast. You didn't just respond differently. You transcended the mechanism they used to control you. They relied on routine, and you broke it. Their entire scheme needed you to show up in patterns they could manipulate, patterns that no longer exist. The tools they once used to stir guilt, control narrative, or provoke attention now fall into silence. Your lack of response isn't disconnection, it's direction. You're tuned in now to something they can't mimic or access. They can't plan 2 moves ahead anymore, because they can't even tell what game you're playing. The stability they once found in your emotional loops has vanished. You're unpredictable, not from chaos, but from clarity. You're not unstable. You're unreachable. Your quiet doesn't mean surrender. It means sovereignty. You're not frozen. You're grounded. They confused absence of words with absence of strength. But you were choosing not to lend your breath to a broken structure. What looked like hesitation was discernment. You weren't waiting for a chance to speak. You were learning how not to waste your energy. Now, your refusal to respond isn't confusion. It's control. Not their kind of control, yours. A sacred, internal kind that can't be lured or manipulated. There's a weight in your stillness they didn't expect. You're not participating in the dance anymore, and they feel it. The silence has changed shape. It used to be a pause they could dominate. Now it's a declaration they can't decode. Every time you decline the invitation to chaos, you make a statement. I see everything, and I choose none of it. They don't know what you realized. They only know that the bridge is gone, and the silence left behind, it's louder than any confrontation they ever prepared for. They misjudged the quiet. They thought you were resetting, waiting, even hiding. But the truth is, you evolved in real time, and they weren't invited to witness it. Now they're spinning in confusion, not because you left, but because you didn't tell them how or when. You walked out of the story and burned the script on your way out. That's what they can't shake. You didn't react. You redefined. You didn't announce your power. You embodied it. And that kind of elevation doesn't echo, it radiates.